Good afternoon, and welcome to BJA's FY2020 BJA Solicitation Webinar on Body-Worn Camera Policy and Implementation Program to support law enforcement agencies. I am David Lewis. I am the Acting Associate Deputy Director for the Bureau of Justice Assistance. And working with me today on today's webinar will be Geraldo Vasquez. Go ahead, Geraldo.
Hi, my name is Gerardo Velasquez. I'm State Policy Advisor for the Bureau of Justice Assistance. I'm the co-lead for the Body-Worn Camera Program.
Let's get started here. Here's a summary of the topics that we will be covering today. Just want to make clarification that there are actually two body-worn camera solicitations that BJ has out there right now. They both close on May 5th. First bullet point that you see here is dealing with the implementation program to support law enforcement agencies. The other one that is out there, and you need to look at this very, very clearly, is this is for small and rural law enforcement agencies, but this is what we would call a TTA provider solicitation. And what that is for an individual, there will only be one award there, and that individual will actually oversee the distribution of about $8.5 million to small and rural law enforcement agencies. So this is not where you would apply if you're a small or rural agency for funding. You can apply in the one that we're going over today, but you could also wait until this sub or a type of mini grant program will be distributed, and that will be announced. And there will be a separate webinar on that explaining how that will work. I just want to make that very clear for everybody. Now, as I stated, the webinar that we're dealing with today is dealing with the implementation program for supporting law enforcement. And that, as I stated, is due May 5th and must be in the grants.gov system by 11:59 p.m. on that date. So the very first thing that we get questions about is eligibility. And under this particular program, the eligible candidates are states, units of government, federally recognized Indian tribes, and public agencies as defined by 34 U.S.C. Section 10251A6. I have, as you see on the slide there, and that is the definition if you actually look that up. If you want to read that in depth, you can look that up under Google, and you will get this same section here. Remember, you go to A6 is a subsection. The other thing is, too, is with states, you're going to see this could be either for state agencies or for state, and we'll talk about this in upcoming slides. If it's a partnership, say it's a state administrating agency or a state organization that wants to get the funding and then make it available for other agencies within their state. The last thing in the bottom bullet that I wanted to say is that correctional agencies are eligible to apply for this program. Now, they need to be correctional agencies that are receiving public funds. For example, they may be a subsection of the sheriff's department or the state correctionals, but they cannot be from private prisons, and they should be doing and must do law enforcement functions. I wanted to give you an example because we've got a lot of questions that come into us and ask us, am I eligible to apply for this grant? Up on the screen, you'll see there are several examples of the different things that we've talked about. And this regional consortia or state are ones that we're really looking for this year to help us get body-worn cameras to as many agencies as possible. Now, let me just give you a brief program summary. And what this program is designed to do specifically is to expand body-worn camera programs that have specific plans in place, and they want to implement this technology in their particular area. As part of the submission, they must describe and be very clear on how they will deploy the technology and what specific ways will be used to enhance the applicant's mission statement. Now, There are a number of objectives and deliverables under this particular program. And the first one you'll see there is development of planned and phased approach. This is really a summary of, as I mentioned before, on how you're going to do policies, training, deployment, procurement, and so forth of the body-worn cameras. The next one is implementation of the operational procedures tracking mechanisms. And this will actually be the way that the agency is going to review access storage, they're going to retain it, redact it, or how they will be deleting the evidence that is collected by the body-worn cameras. Third, we have on there is a demonstration of commitment to incorporating the evidentiary value of the body-worn cameras. And this is really giving a summary of, what's going to be done in the field, what's going to be done with administration, what they're going to do, and the outcomes within the system, and how this is going to benefit officer. And number 4, establishing training protocols. Now, this is not just for the officers that are going to be wearing the body-worn cameras, but this is also training protocols for the supervisors and administrators. Number 5, addressing access to and sharing body-worn cameras. This is a question that comes up a lot of times, and we need to look at that, and in your applications need to explain that on how the footage is going to be used by agency personnel, especially prosecutors and other stakeholders, and even the community, and this would include media. Okay, our next slide talks about authorizing language. Now, the body-worn camera program is funded by Congress. We get very clear statements on what can be done under this particular program. So the very first thing is that it has to be, the program or what you're submitting has to be to purchase body-worn cameras for law enforcement. And you have to have, you have to purchase the cameras. You can't have any kind of program where body-worn cameras are not being considered. Next is the solicitation requires to develop a comprehensive implementation program. Next, you have, they're reviewed on the basis of the comprehensive plan and the overall plan of what you're doing. And I would say, and this is an important part when you're doing your application, that you have to be clear, as we mentioned, about the body-worn cameras, and looking at not only what you're doing with the funding now, but what is your broader program, especially if you may not be funding or providing body-worn cameras to the entire agency for this first initiated grant. These next couple of slides will tell you about the types of programs that are supported under this particular program. The first, very simple, is a pilot implementation program. This would be where an agency may decide to fund a certain number of cameras and test it out and see how it may benefit their agency or their community. The next one is the implementation of a broad-scale program. This is dealing more with the agencies that are looking to fund possibly all of the officers in their agency or a major number of officers. The next is a program expansion program, and that's where an agency may already have purchased body-worn cameras in a partial or pilot implementation, and now they plan to expand it across the department. The final point on this one is initial or expansive implementation. And this is an agency that does not have a program, but wants to deploy the body-worn cameras in a large cross-section of the department. And this may include patrol officers, as I mentioned, sheriffs, with corrections officers, and other officers that may not be sworn, but have contact with the public. And an example of this was animal control officers, where some agencies have come in and requested cameras that they could use for animal control officers also. Now, this talks a little bit about a change in whether it's an individual partnership or a consortia type application. First, the first one, the individual agency applicant, very simple. Single applicant comes in looking for funds to do the body-worn camera program. The next is a partnership application. And in this particular situation, it's very important to note that there is a lead agency, and that lead agency is responsible for the grant administration, the reporting, and manages the what goes out to the subrecipient agency. It's really doing a type of pass-through. The next is a consortia application, and this is more of representing possibly a large number of agencies or regional type approach. This one is also where you might have a state consortia, and these would be state administrating agencies for, say, BJA. And these are very important, again, because we said there's one larger entity that comes in, gets the grant funding, and can pass it through to maybe adjacent agencies, partner agencies, and it works out very well. Now, there is a match requirement in this particular program, and that is a one-to-one match by grantee. And we do have some examples of this in upcoming slides. And next, there is a particular funding cap matrix, and that is a maximum of $2,000 per camera. Now, that does not say that the cameras will cost $2,000, but we use this cap to figure out what the formula is, which is what our next slide, or our next bullet point points out. The formula is the number of body-worn cameras in the project times $2,000. That's the maximum requested amount. And again, we'll go over this in some examples that will be shown in upcoming slides. Now, under this particular grant solicitation, no award can come in exceeding $2 million. That is the highest number that's allowed to be applied for. Now, these were the funding cap scenarios that I mentioned. Let's look at an example for a broad-scale program. And you see an agency that may have 100 full-time officers. They only want to purchase 80 cameras. So we take the funding cap of $2,000 per camera, and we take that times the 80 cameras requested. Now that tells us that the maximum amount that can be requested by federal funding is $160,000. Now, using this and putting this in perspective, that's what you can request from federal funds, $160,000. If this agency asks for $160,000 of federal funding, they must do a match of $160,000, taking it to $320,000. Now, let's look at the next one, which is a pilot program. Again, we're saying the Sheriff's Department, 200 deputies. They only want to start off with 25 body-worn cameras. Again, taking the $2,000 per camera funding cap times the 25, and what they can ask for in federal funds is $50,000. Now, a program expansion program. In this particular one, that you'll see that it's a large agency, and they originally already deployed 600 body-worn cameras. And now what they want to do is provide cameras to everybody in their agency, so they need 400 additional cameras. So again, taking the funding cap number times the number of requested cameras, that's $800,000. I will also tell you that all of these all these examples are highlighted in the solicitation. Now, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Geraldo. Good, Geraldo?
Allowable costs for federal funds. The BWC-PIP allows federal funds to be used for body-worn camera purchases, licensing, or contracts, related equipment and equipment training officers, supporting personnel, community outreach efforts, and research and evaluation. Unallowable costs for federal funds. The BWC-PIP does not allow federal funds to be used for any pre-award expense, any items contracted with service provider prior to the award, already budgeted body-worn cameras, equipment, or contracts. Applicants can add but can't supplant body-worn cameras in existing local budgets. Body-worn camera data storage costs as a line item in the quote or budget. Software as a service exception. The BWC-PIP LEA program does not allow for federal reimbursement of data storage costs. However, BJA recognizes that the body-worn camera systems are often bundled or sold as a software as a service, with no line item distinction of data storage costs. Procurements with bundled costs, specifically no line item storage costs, are permissible for reimbursement, and the agency will not be asked to break out the costs. Matching requirement. The BWC PIP requires a 50% match, $1 for every federal dollar requested. Match may be cash or in kind. Cash match includes cash spent for project-related costs. In-kind match includes, but is not limited to, the valuation of non-cash contributions. These may be in the form of services, supplies, or equipment. Match considerations. Awardees are accountable for fulfilling match obligations, just as they are for federal obligations. Be cautious when overmatching. Match expenses must be related to the body-worn camera program. Federal funds and matching funds need not reflect the full cost of your body-worn camera program. In-kind and cash match requirements. Federal funds may not cover more than 50% of the total submitted budget for the program. Applicants must identify the source of the 50% non-federal portion of the total project cost and how they will use the match funds. If a successful applicant's proposed match exceeds the required match amount and OJP approves the budget, the total match amount incorporated into the approved budget becomes mandatory and subject to federal audit. Match is restricted to the same uses of funds as allowed for the federal funds. Applicants may satisfy this match requirement with either cash contributions or in-kind contributions of goods or services that are directly related to the purpose for which the grant was awarded.
Thank you, Geraldo. We're going to go over showing just a couple of simplified budget examples. Of course, the ones that you will submit in your application will be a little more complex. And I will tell you right now that this is extremely important to make sure things are documented correctly, not only in the budget, but in the budget narrative. This first simplified budget, for example, A, this particular agency is asking for 100 cameras, and their cost is $900. Then there's the licensing fees, the program manager, as Geraldo mentioned, in allowable cost. You can get reimbursement for staff, might be for somebody managing the program or some training officers or whatever. And then you also can get reimbursement for body-worn camera training, either that's provided by the as part of the quote or some other training that may be of interest. In this particular situation, the total amount of federally requested amount is $200,000, and their matching expenditures is the balance of other services. As we mentioned, maybe salaries, training, equipment, and so forth. Particularly, these ones need docking stations, server upgrades, and travel to the national meeting. We didn't mention this, but there is, for first-year applicants, there is a national meeting that's held, and it's required to put that travel into your award. So in this particular situation, the total project cost is $400,000. Now, we know in the project, as we told before, that this does come under the allowable amount. In example B, in this particular situation, the agency is only asking for 25 federal reimbursement for 25 cameras. But in total, and you'll see as we go through this, they're buying 54 cameras. So again, under the federal expenditures, they want 25 cameras at the given cost, 25 licenses, and travel for the national training, the national meeting. And you'll see in this particular case that they're asking for the federal funds to be reimbursed for that training or for that travel. And then we have, for the matching funds, they're buying 29 cameras and the service fee. So if you look above, you can see that $23,000 is requested in federal funds. Their match is $23,200, which is allowable to go have additional match to this. And they chose in this particular one not to include some other expenses, and the overmatch isn't that bad. It's just minimal. So in this particular case, the total project cost is $46,200. Now, there are some policy stipulations when applying for this funding. First of all, that the development of the body-worn camera policies, that they have to be deliberate, comprehensive, and partnership-based. The policy development is mandatory, and the funding is held until 90% of it is held until the policy is met. Now, we will tell you a little bit that helping you as a grantee, should you be lucky enough to be a grantee, that you will actually have assistance from what we call a TTA provider, Training and Technical Assistance, and we will explain that in an upcoming slide. Body-worn camera clearance policies. They're made post-award in one of two ways. The agency's executive attests to the policy, and we mentioned that what has to be done, and that you're working with the TTA provider to develop such a policy. Existing policies. Applicants, these are for people that are doing expansion of the programs. If they have an existing policy, they can attach it in their application, but this does not clear them for the condition of the award because it's a new award. The policy will have to be updated. This deals the awardee training and technical assistance provider, as I mentioned. The BJA selects a TTA provider. In this case, our current one is CNA that's helping us with our program today to assist the awardee. The TTA provider, they include technical assistance, policy development, providing best practices to help the agencies out. Peer engagements is what we mean by peer engagement is possibly your agency that may be the same size of another agency and have questions on how they implemented or did certain things in their program. We would make that connection to allow you to help each other out. Community outreach. This could be dealing with citizens, but might also dealing with the media or some of the other things. And specialized training. Specialized training dealing with body-worn cameras, dealing with storage, dealing with policy, those kind of things. Now, each awardee does have a designated point of contact, and they have a team assigned to them to help them develop their policies and help them address any of these issues that you may come up with. Now, the TTA provider also they provide content for the Body-Worn Camera Toolkit website that has a lot of the documents and information that you need as you go through this process. And they produce and distribute a newsletter and periodic webinars on specific subjects that that some of our grantees have brought up and help them understanding the body-worn camera program a little bit more. The body-worn camera applications must include, and this is first of all, the SF424 that you see at the very top. This kit tells us who the agency is, the point of contact, the amount of money requested, and is a very important document in the submission. It also has to have a project abstract, the narrative, the budget detail worksheet, and budget narrative. Now, these are actually two separate documents, and we'll explain those a little bit further in an upcoming slide. We also have the Financial Management System Internal Controls Questionnaire that must be completed, disclosure of any lobbying activities, the disclosure of pending applications, especially for those under body-worn camera, and letter affirming the regular view of the camera footage to prove officer safety. Project narrative, not to exceed 15 pages, double-spaced. This would be a minimum of 12-point standard font, and you wouldn't want to make it any bigger because, remember, you're limited to certain pages. We prefer a Times Roman font, 1-inch margins around the outside of the page, and use of sections and organizations is preferred. I'll talk about that in a few seconds here. And attachments do not count against the page limit. Project narrative. When I talk about the titles, you'll see that there are certain ones in here for project narrative, this list. Description of the issue. We'll ask that you bold it and underline it, and then do the description of the issue. Come to the next one, project design implementation. bold this, underline, provide the information below. Now, this capabilities and competencies. This is one that I wanted to point out to all of you, that this is one section that many applicants lose points. Capabilities and competencies, what we're looking for here is not exaggerated because you can attach resumes of the people that are going to work on this and so forth. But what we want to know is if you have a particular, say, a captain that's going to oversee this program, you put his name, what his job's going to be. You may have somebody else that's in charge of training, that person, what their job's going to be. The competencies, what you want to do is explain is, yes, we have the capability to do this work, manage this information, and provide the things that are required under the grant. Having that all spelled out makes it very good, very easy for our peer reviewers to score this particular section. Now, it does ask for a plan on what you're going to do after the 3 years of this particular program, how you're going to keep this program funded. You may come in for maybe expansion funding, but you can't come in for continuation funding. And then finally, the plan for collecting the required data and the performance measures. As we're looking at the budget, you need to provide, we ask you to use the budget provided form. You can also use an Excel spreadsheet, but it's much easier to use the budget form because it has the categories in it. Now, you must provide a separate narrative for the budget items to be provided. And this is a separate narrative. It's not inclusive with the detailed budget. And this is extremely important, that if you're using a contractor to do certain things, or who you might be, the contractor may be for your cameras, or if you're doing a particular type of training, those kind of things need to be spelled out in the budget narrative. Now, it's also important to note that the vendor quote does not qualify as a budget, and it must be submitted at the time of the solicitation, and we know that it's just an estimate. Now, because there may be a RFP that has to go out, or you might have to look at some sole source, so there's a lot of things that have to deal with the budget. Now, the other thing is, too, is once you receive this award, it doesn't, mean that you already have acceptance or endorsement of the quote. That has to come under the budget approval. Attachments that need to be included. If you're requesting an indirect cost, you must have the indirect cost rate agreement that tells us who approved that percentage for indirect costs, whether it's BJA, OJP, or another federal agency. Tribal authorization resolution. If you're using research and evaluation, you have to have information about the independence and integrity. MOUs. If you have MOUs and this is a partnership application, you have to have those MOUs in place, and any letters of support from subrecipient agencies or letters of support from, say, government entities. A lot of times we get letters of support from maybe a congressman, senator, or some other state official. Those must be submitted at the time of the application. They can not be sent to us independently, because if it's not in the application packet, it will not be passed on to our peer reviewers and will not be considered. And finally, letter of participation in using a research partner. Important elements. Now we have to look at, we call it the economies of scale, that who are the partnerships, what are the recourses, what are their shared contacts. So we look at all that as part of the evaluation of the application. We'll also look at, if you look at some of the technical considerations, for example, from our sister agency at the National Institute of Justice, talking about body-worn camera technologies. The other thing is, too, is we talked about partnership outreach, talking about letters of support. We have seen sometimes that there's some disconnection between the law enforcement agencies and the prosecutors. If you have that done up front, that really helps on the evaluation of your application. Have you addressed officer concerns and officers' buy-in? We've also seen situations where agencies have gone and got the body-worn camera, and then they have problems with maybe the officers union or a group of officers. So these kind of things, getting those done at the front end, are very helpful. And increase the efficiency, you know, what you plan on getting out of the training and all the other items that are in there. Expectations from your agency and the public, and the commitment of evidence-based practices. And in the solicitation, you'll see there is a section on what is the expectations under evidence-based. Performance management and reporting. There definitely has to be a plan on collecting the data required under the solicitation, and you do have a requirement to do biannual reporting in what is called our grants management system, GMS. When you're receiving funds under the solicitation, you have to provide this data, and it's gives us an idea on how we measure the work that's been completed. And we must also require being involved with all the post-award reporting. I mentioned a few times talking about peer review. And under the peer review, what we do is we use subject matter experts outside of BJA to review the applications. And they're the ones that evaluate the application and then provide possible scoring back to us. So we talked about the sections before and how they break them down in your narrative. So under the description of the issue or issues, that's 15%. The project design and implementation, 35%. Capabilities and competency, 15%. Program continuity, this is how you're going to support the program after the funding is completed, and the plan for collecting the required performance measured data. And then finally, the budget at 20%. You will see that item number 2 in the bottom item, that's 55% of the criteria. And then the capabilities and competencies, another 15%. So those 3 areas really need to be strong for this program to move forward and score well in the peer review. Under the major takeaways, you have to remember that this is a competitive solicitation, and this is not just an equipment purchase grant. There, as we mentioned, there's a policy that goes along with that, and a program that has to be a complete thought process. Excuse me. Grant funds cannot be used to pay for body-worn cameras that have already been bought, contracted, or before any grant notification. This is what we would call supplanting. Also want to reiterate that 90% of your funds are held until the policy development is cleared. This is a 3-year grant program. There is travel to a grantee meeting for year 1 and is required. And more you demonstrate and understand the value of implementation of this particular program, the higher the consideration and more competitive your solicitation will, or your application will be. Now that we're only a few weeks away from the submission date, you should already have done, and you've got your DUNS number and then a SAMS number. You should be registered with grants.gov. And I want to reiterate that these applications are due May 5th, 11:59 p.m. That is the link to the funding opportunity, but I will tell you right now, if you're looking for it, the easiest way is Google BJA funding, go to available funding, and then scroll down to May 5th applications, and you'll see the one for body-worn camera supporting law enforcement agencies. With that, I believe we'll take questions and answers.
So the first one, quite a few questions on will we be able to have access to the webinar recording after today? And just to let everyone know, it will be posted to the bwctta.com website. So now I'll give you your first question, David. Can the match be completely in kind?
Yes, the match can be 100% in kind.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, can EMS use the body cameras, or is this grant solely for law enforcement?
It's solely for law enforcement that has a law enforcement function. Now, if it's say it's an EMS that works in conjunction with the SWAT team or is doing some kind of support for law enforcement, we can look at that as a consideration. you can put that in your application. If it's not approved, we would just take it out of the budget, but it wouldn't conversely work against your application.
Okay, thank you. The next question is there a specific brand or company one must go through or use in order to purchase the cameras with the funding provided?
No, that is up to you. That's I mentioned briefly about a procurement process or an RFP. Now, if you are doing an expansion program where you may want to use the same service provider that you've used before, and it's over a particular amount, you'd have to go to OJP's financial guide section that tells you over a certain amount. We have to do a sole source. But there is no one entity that you have to go through for your cameras.
Okay, great. We received a message from someone who works for the COPS office, and they are funding body cameras under their tribal grant program. They want to know if there are any national, I'm not sure what the next word is, that the awardee needs to follow with the purchase of these cameras.
A type of guideline, maybe is what they were asking?
I believe so, yes.
No. Again, there are. You can go to NIJ's body-worn camera technology overview, but there is no specific guideline. Now, I will tell you right now is if a tribal entity is applying for body-worn cameras through the COPS office and they come and they are applying here, they need to make that disclosure of funding as part of their application.
Okay, thank you. Someone asked, they said that if they understand correctly, there will be a funding opening that would better support smaller and rural agencies. Is this correct? And will it be provided by BJA or another agency? And how do they make sure that they're on the mailing list to be notified?
Yes, that is actually going to be through a little bit of complicated, but bear with me. It's going to be to an individual service provider that's going to get the funding. They will then come up with a process for small and rural agencies to apply through them, but final approval will be through BJA. The notification, like I said, there will be a webinar explaining that, explaining the process, will be posted on the BJA website, so that's the place I would take a look and make sure that that you keep an eye on that particular website for additional information.
Okay, great. The next question is the national meeting and the one regional peer-to-peer meeting only for year one costs, or should we budget for each meeting in year 2 and year 3 as well?
It's usually just for year 1. You can budget if you want to send it for additional years, but it's only mandated for year 1.
Okay, thank you. The next one is, what successful sustainability solutions have you seen in previously awarded projects? How have others sustained their awards?
A lot of, you'll see a lot of different ways. Some of them get, they try to budget additional money from their own community, but after they purchase the cameras, one of the biggest things that most of the agencies are talking to us about is the storage cost. So some have been able to access some funds that were acquired through taxing, state taxes or local taxes. Others have been able to get some additional grant funding from maybe their state agencies that have additional funds out there. And some of them have come up with some unique approaches to go in with a type of consortium where people pay a certain amount into the consortium and then they help defray some of the cost. Those are a lot of different ways out there.
Is there a template for the letter affirming regular review of BWC's video to improve officer safety? Who needs to be the signatory on this letter?
It needs to be the chief, because he manages the police department. But there is, we don't have an example, but if you make contact to here at BJA, we'll see if we can find one that might be usable.
Okay, thank you. The next one is, are current awardees able to apply for an expansion grant while still completing the pilot grant?
Yes, you can make that application, but there's kind of a unique issue to that is if you're in your first year, the application may not fare well. But if you're coming to the last part of your year where we'll see the new funds pick up after the other one. So, but it is allowed. It will be evaluated based on where you are in your current grant, and those are just things that are taken under consideration.
Okay. The next one is, someone wanted to clarify something that you had said. So they said no pre-award costs will be allowed under this program, regardless of whether they are requested in the application. Is that correct?
Yes. For example, I'm not 100% sure where they were going on this, but let's say, for example, that you're applying for this grant, but you've already reached a contract with a vendor to buy the cameras prior to approval of the grant and having your budget approved and so forth. That, because a contract is actually a commitment, those costs would not be honored under the if you were issued an award.
Okay, great. The next question, someone said, with the current COVID-19 situation, some city halls are shut down. Will applicants be penalized if community stakeholders, for example, local prosecutors, are unable to provide letters of support?
I think if you were able to draft a letter, say the agency or the applying agency, and have it code signed by a prosecutor, which they can do as an electronic signature, that would be acceptable. The other thing is if you make that in part of your narrative, or you provide some additional information that says explaining that specifically that situation where you're unable to get the prosecutor, and that should they receive an award, that will be a condition that would have to be submitted prior to the approval of the final application or the final award.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, does the grant need to be for 3 years, or can we complete the project in 1 year?
Well, that's an interesting question in that you could very easily spend the money in 1 year, but the evaluation part of it, where you have to provide the performance measures, those are required to go for the 3-year period. So even though you would expend all your funds, maybe get all the cameras implemented, you can't close out the grant. You would still have a responsibility to do the performance measures and report into our GMS for the entire 3-year period.
Okay, thank you. The next one is, can our agencies match the cost of storage?
No. The only time that there is a exception, you would have to go to the solicitation or refer back to this presentation online, is under SaaS, which is software as a service, where you got a bundled package where nothing was broken down in line item. In other words, total number. For example, you bought 25 cameras, and the total cost was X number of dollars for everything in the quote. In other words, that would include, and not broken out. Can't be any broken out is this much for camera, this much for docking station, that they just, it's a flat quote. We won't ask you to break that out, but those will be reviewed not only by us, but our Office of General Counsel. You still there, Bridget?
Yes. Sorry, I must have cut out. If an agency received BJA funding for the program implementation several years ago, are they eligible for funds for program expansion?
Yes. if you're there's no guidelines on when you received the funding last, but you would itemize it that you're coming in, that you've already been a BJA grantee. And one of the good things that you can put in your application that would be beneficial for the peer reviewers is, yes, we received previous funding, we've completed, did all the reports on time, that, you know, followed all the procedures, because those kind of things get you extra points when reviewers are looking at looking at the application.
Okay, great. The next one is, we have an existing body-worn camera program with full deployment. The platform that we use is being discontinued. With having to move to a completely different platform, can we submit that as a new program? This would include a totally different camera system as well.
Yeah, you can do that. You'd have to, as part of your narrative, you need to have a section in there on why you're applying for additional cameras or new cameras. Explain, you know, what happened, you know, whatever the elements are of the old program. But you can't. This is a new program, but you will have to, even under the old program, if you had policies and so forth, they would all have to be revisited if you were selected to be a new awardee.
Okay, great. The next one is, will the micro grants that you mentioned be a 50-50 or dollar-for-dollar match? And do you have an approximate date for that announcement?
You know what? I don't believe that there's a match on that one, but I need to verify that. And I do not have a date when that'll be available, only because the selection of the service provider closes on May 5th. And then, again, this is a new program, so the development of all of that will have to be all in place. So I would say it would probably be, we're probably looking at the end of the year, maybe November, December. But again, I will talk to my coworkers to see if we can keep a status on the BJA website on target dates, when potential webinars are going to be, and overview of the program.
Okay, thank you. The next one is, can we request funds in the budget that budget for additional cameras in year 2 and year 3 for agency expansion?
No, this is a one-time. This is a one-time application, and it's supposed to cover the 3 years. The expansion, as I said, if, for example, say that there is a body-worn camera solicitation in 2021 that allows for program expansion, most likely, if you're just in year 2, you can apply. We can never stop you from applying, but how they will be evaluated by peer reviewers, probably not getting as high as marks as new programs or expansion programs that are at the end of their grant cycle.
Okay, thank you. The next one is, can funds be used to replace a body-worn camera system that is already in place? They have old technology and it's going out of business, and that's the reason for replacing the current body-worn camera system.
They can. You're coming in as if that company is going out of business, so you're coming in as almost as a new program, or even if you're expanding it. So it's very important on how, and I mentioned this earlier on a previous question, it's very important to articulate in your narrative why you're coming in and applying for funds for these particular cameras, and explaining that the company's going out of business, it's old technology. That kind of thing needs to be explained, so it doesn't appear that that you're just getting more cameras and trying to mismatch it over the current system, because a lot of times that doesn't work. But I think I would advise anybody that's doing this due to older technology that you articulate in your narrative under description of the issues. That's the good part to put there. I mean, there's an issue being created by old technology or companies going out of business. If you put that right in front of your application, that would work well for you in your evaluation.
Okay, great. Next question is, what is considered a small department?
We've used a couple of different definitions. What we're looking at in rural or small departments are usually populations under 100,000. So we will that will be clarified in the program and documented both on the body-worn camera website as well as the BJA website. And those will be the conditions will be explained in the announcement.
So the next one is, for an expansion program, is there a requirement to attend the conference with each grant? For example, the 2019 body-worn camera program and the 2020 body-worn camera program.
If it's an expansion program and you're a new grantee under the 2020, you just have to go for 2020.
Okay. The next question is, could a small police department in a suburban area be eligible to be a subrecipient for the small and rural body-worn camera grant?
Yes. They would be a subrecipient to the service provider. They wouldn't apply directly under that particular solicitation.
Okay, great. The next one is, do you have to provide a quote from the vendor in the budget worksheet to validate your devices?
Yeah, you have to put in the budget worksheet. Doesn't have to be a quote from the service provider. You're putting in there what the estimated cost for the cameras. Again, using the funding cap scenario, how many cameras you want times 2,000. That gives you the total amount you can request. Then you take it from there and how you place it in your budget.
Okay. The next one is, what can be used as an indirect cost rate?
Indirect cost rate has to be one that's been approved by the Office of Justice Programs, or it needs to be an approved indirect cost rate by another federal agency. And that comes in a letter, and you would have to submit that as part of your application.
Okay. And the last question with this last minute that we have, a few people asked if they can have copies of the slide presentation today, because the audio will be posted with the slides in a few days on the website, but they would like to know if they can have copies of the slides today.
They will not be able to do it. You have to get it online.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for joining our webinar today. Again, if we can answer any questions for you, I believe the slide is up that has that has Gerardo and my contact information, or you can contact through the body-worn camera website or through the BJA website, and we'll answer any questions that you may have. Thank you again.